Well, welcome everyone. This is Natalie Ashdown with you. Happy Friday to you all those people who are listening online, live, and happy days to you if you are picking up this webinar after our call from the recording. It's quite an exciting day in the land of the International Coach Federation and the land of professional coaching, because today I'd like to share with you everything you need to know about the updates to the ICF Core Competencies. Some of you may have received the email that actually dropped on Friday, and the email that dropped on Friday was to announce that the ICF Core Competencies are being updated. So that's the purpose of our email, of our time this morning. If you are collecting your International Coach Federation CCEs, then you'll be able to receive that straight away after our webinar today. Just remember, you have to stay on the webinar for the full 30 minutes though, because that's the rules that we have in place. Okay, so today I'd like to share with you the background to the changes to the ICF Core Competencies, highlight some of the major changes, and then I'll dig into a little bit of the detail. But most importantly, I think it's also about what it means for us as coaches, and I'll introduce you to the timeline for the changes as well. So Open Door is an accredited coach training provider with the International Coach Federation. I've actually been privileged to see some of the briefings and to receive some briefings, 2 or 3 hours actually of briefings about the changes. So I'd like to share some of that with you today. But most importantly also is, because we are an accredited coach training provider, we can ask questions directly of the ICF and directly of the people who are managing the changes at the ICF. So I would really love for us to be able to share our learned experience, have thought-provoking conversations, create a community like we do normally, but also today is a fantastic opportunity. If you've got questions, if you'd like to put those into the chat box, then I can pick them up. If I can't answer them, I can pick them up and we can get our answers quite quickly from the International Coach Federation. So interactive as always. Welcome to the new people who we haven't seen before. We come together every Friday and we share our knowledge, learned experience around a key coaching topic. And welcome back to all the regulars. Just jump in as you would normally. And as I said, great opportunity for us to ask questions. I'm not assuming that I know everything about the changes. So if you've got questions, let's put them into the chat box. I will collect them and then I'll get those answers out to you just as soon as I hear back. So here we go. Let me tell you about the background. So this is happy Friday to you, Jenny. Yeah, she says, happy Friday and thanks for the update, giving us the opportunity to ask questions about the changes. Absolutely. So as always, yeah, jump in, and that's how, Jenny's just reminded me, that's how I pick up our interaction, is through the chat box. So go for it, everybody. Thanks, Jenny. All right, so background to the changes. This is the first major update that the ICF Core Competencies have had in over 20 years. The ICF actually invested 2 years in terms of research. They did a number of small subject matter expert study groups. And then they also sent out a major survey, which they had around about 1,300 responses to from coaches. And I remember at the time, I think I actually responded to that survey. What I like about what they've done, and they're emphasizing this quite a lot, is that the changes to the ICF Core Competencies are data-driven and they're evidence-based. And what this means is that they collected an enormous amount of data. And in order to change the ICF Core Competency, in order to change something, it had to be backed up by data. So they couldn't just say, well, we don't like the idea of active listening, let's call it listening actively, unless there was something in the data and a significant data point that actually said it should be changed. So really strong methodology around it. They've engaged an external supplier around the methodology, and the methodology was based on job analysis of an effective coach, which is really great to see. So that the subject matter experts were asked, what does an effective coach look like? What is the competencies, the skills, the abilities of an effective coach? And then what data do we have to support that? So I'm really for what it's worth, really pleased to see that that was the case. They are also looking at publishing the results of the research in some key journals. And I think they have plans for publishing the research, because you can imagine if there's 1,300 responses about competencies, that's a fantastic data set that they've got. So we'll be watching out, in the next few months or so to actually see the results, further results of the research as well. So the question we want to ask is, well, why do we care about this? Of course, in our certificate 4, we ban why questions at some point, but but this is a really, we always need to know why. Why do we care about this? For me, the reason why we care about this is because the ICF Core Competencies, I feel, and this is what they've been explaining to the training providers, is that it's actually much more reflective now of current practice. I think I care about it because when I read the core competencies as they are newly written, they sound a lot more familiar to me as an executive coach, as a coach trainer, as a workplace coach, coaching in organizations. So whilst they're a general set of competencies that can be across the globe and across all types of coaching, they actually sound and read to me a lot more familiar in terms of workplace coaching. And that's really important because they wanted the core competencies to reflect current practice. It's a key distinction because what they're saying is it should sound familiar to you because we are actually reflecting current practice today. And so that's very important. The other thing is it's also very important to maintain, if we're having a global standard for competency, that standard is actually maintained. So there, I think for me, 2 important reasons why we care about the changes. And that's why I'm spending today to introduce you to them as well. Jump in with thoughts or comments as you go along, as we go along as well. So when we were shared the information about the changes to the to the core competencies, it was very clear the kind of language that the working party, I'll call them, were using is that this is an evolution of the core competencies, not a revolution. So they're not like dumping all of the competencies and starting all over again. They're evolving the competencies to make them reflective of current practice. And that's why when we are incorporating them within the coach training programs, we are incorporating the competencies of current practice. So more of an evolution, and I'll tell you a bit more about what that means in a moment. And for me, I love this picture, actually. It took me a while to find a picture that means something like evolution, not revolution. If you can imagine typing that in to Google, you'll get a million different images. But this is kind of the evolving nature. There's some things that are the same. Ultimately, it's the same, but things are changing over time. So I'd like to now highlight to you some of the major changes that we actually have seen in the ICF Core Competencies, and then I'll dig into the detail as well. So in particular, one of the major changes is there's a much stronger emphasis on ethics and professionalism. And the area of ethics has actually been expanded quite a lot. There's a number of different items around ethics and how we manage confidentiality. The other major change is the introduction of the terminology around mindset, that coaching, and I like this in particular, coaching is not just a process, it's not just something that we do, it's actually a mindset. And for those of you that are familiar with open door coaching, and for those of you, I can see all the great coaches on the line, you'd be familiar with this. We actually, through our coach training programs, we change our mindset, we update our mindsets around what coaching actually is. So we kind of become the coach. We are being a coach rather than just focusing on the doing of coaching. So that idea of mindset's been written now into the competencies, and I think that's a terrific update. I think it's the case because we're often coach training people who aren't familiar with coaching, and you go through, they go through that period of, yeah, but how's this different from mentoring, and it's kind of what I do already and all those kind of things. And then they kind of click, halfway through day 1, they go, oh, now I get what coaching is. I have to ask quality questions. I have to maintain space. I can't jump in and solve the problem. And I can't jump in and advise and tell and mentor. And you know, that mindset change that people make when they're in a coach training program, that's what I think has been built into the competency. The other major change that I can see is, and that we've been highlighted, so I'm basically summarizing the briefings that we've received. The other major change is around reflective practice and continuous development. So the idea that as professionals, we are reflecting on our practice, we're thinking about continuous improvement, is being built into the competencies now. It's kind of like, this is where I think this is reflective of practice, because we'd go, okay, well, we do that now. We think about our coaching conversations. We think about how we might improve them. We think about how we're serving the client. We think about ourselves as coaches in the moment. And as coaches, like we are all doing right here today, we're focusing on our continuous professional development. It's what we do. And that's where it's an example of how what we do, what we are actually doing today, is built into the ICF Core Competencies. So it might have been implied in the competencies beforehand, but now it's actually built into it. And I think that's a really excellent thing to see. Ask questions as we go. I'll pause. I've got lots to share with you, so I'll try not to just rabbit at a million miles an hour. I feel that the competencies, when I read them with a lens of workplace coaching, they sound a bit more familiar to me from that lens. They're written as a global standard, so they're not written for workplace coaches. They're written for all coaches, as I said. But it sounds kind of more familiar and comfortable to me in terms of a set of competencies. The language is definitely more streamlined. It's much more succinct. The actual wording, the number of words in the competencies, they dropped it down from about 1,500 words down to 1,100 words. So much more succinct. And the other thing is that there's 11 competencies previously, and now there's 8. So we'll see what that means in terms of the detail. Any questions at this point? Great. Let's keep moving then. So I'd like to introduce you to the changes to the structure, and this will also show you actually where the changes are, the major changes are in the competencies. And I'll do this quite quickly as well. If you'd like the actual detail, the International Coach Federation have now released the full model as part of being part of this webinar. In the follow-up webinar that we send, we'll actually send you out the full model. Alternatively, you can actually download it from the blog post. We've got a blog post on our website now, and you can download it from there as well. So you will get access to the full set of competencies, the full set of words. Of course, you can always Google and get it off the ICF website as well, no problem. So let me just highlight to you the major changes to the structure. So competency number 1 was meeting ethical guidelines and professional standards. That's now been broken into 2 competencies. In the new model, competency number 1 is demonstrating ethical practice, and coaching number 2 is embodying the coaching mindset. So that's a good example of where I mentioned earlier, where the idea of the coaching mindset, this is not just about doing coaching, it's about how we're showing up, and the mindset of coaching has been introduced into the competencies. So there's a split out there now to really focus on the ethical guidelines, the professional standards, the confidentiality around coaching conversations, how we're showing up as coaches has been a really big it's a really key area that the ICF have focused on, because as they explained to us, that was a really key data point. So whenever they asked questions about coaching and what does an effective coach mean, the knowledge, skills, attributes, etc., ethics, they said, kept coming up. So that's where they've split it out. The next change to the structure, we see establishing the coaching agreement. The words here are very similar, as you can see. So core competency number 2 has gone to now core competency number 3, which is establish and maintains agreements, as you can see there. The key thing here for us, I think, as organizational coaches, workplace coaches, executive coaches, is that under establishing and maintaining the agreements, they're actually recognizing now that the agreement could be set at the organizational level, that there's stakeholders potentially involved in that. So there could be a coaching agreement set in place, but then also for every single coaching session that we actually hold with a client, we're setting a new agreement for every single coaching session as well. So what would you like to achieve today? What would you like to focus on today? So that detail in every single coaching session is rolled up into a larger coaching agreement, and that's often signed off by stakeholders. So this is where I'm saying it sounds and feels more familiar with the work that we are doing, because that's actually broken down. So if you're thinking about where should I read first, I would go into the new competency 3 and see what it says there. Establishing trust and intimacy with the client is now cultivates trust and safety. The ICF made a very big attempt to make sure that the wording and the language of the competencies had global relevance. The ICF Core Competencies have been translated into a number of different languages, and because of that, different words are actually mean different things. And here you'll see that the word intimacy, for example, has been specifically written out of the competencies, and they said that this is one of the words that has different meanings in different contexts. And for me, when I was writing the blog about the changes, I wrote in the blog that some of the words are less jarring. I always found establishing trust and intimacy quite jarring. I suppose it's when I think about intimacy, I think about certain things. Intimacy in this context means something different. I was always a bit uncomfortable with the term. So I'm quite pleased to see that some of these words that were jarring or not meant different things across different contexts and meant different things across different countries have actually been tidied up and removed. And so that's where they're talking about cultivates trust and safety, which is really good. Okay, coaching presence is now maintains presence. There's a little bit of change in the wording underneath that. And active listening is now listening actively. Personally, I would have liked them to dump the word active, because I want people just to listen, not to be thinking and being active. But the active listening has actually been revamped a little bit to talk about what is the client saying and what is the client not saying. So we're attentive as coaches to the spoken words, but we're also attentive to what the client is not saying, and we're also attentive to nonverbal communication, etc., etc. So maybe there's some underlying subtext that we could be curious about and ask a question about. That's what they're really coming towards with this new rewrite of the competency. So you can have a read of that. Not much change there, actually. All right, here's a big change. The changes to the structure in particular. We had 3 competencies around powerful questioning, direct communication, and creating awareness. And this has now been rolled into one competency called evokes awareness. And you can see there that I've actually shared with you the definition of evokes awareness. I do like this definition. It says facilitates client insight and learning by using tools and techniques such as powerful questioning, silence, metaphor, or analogy. Now, what I like about this and what's been explained is that coaching does use tools and techniques. So that's kind of the language that we would use, the coaching toolkit, we're using tools and techniques. And so that's why I'm saying it sounds a bit more familiar to us as workplace coaches. The other thing is they're doing here is they're recognizing that in that tools and techniques, there's a whole pile of different things we can be doing. Powerful questioning, using silence, using metaphors, analogy, etc. So, and the purpose of all of that, the purpose of all of those things that we are doing is to enable and evoke awareness in the client. So we're evoking awareness through the use of our tools and techniques. And I do like this language, actually. There's a lot of language in the other powerful questioning, direct communication, and creating awareness, where if you read them, you go, what does that actually mean? So this is a lot cleaner for me. It's a lot more meaningful as well. Alrighty, I'm just pausing, seeing if you've got any questions as we go. Yeah, I agree with you, Jenny. Jenny says, I like these changes too, making the purpose clearer. Yeah, yeah. Great. Thanks, Maribel. She's saying it's really informative. Thanks. Jenny has asked another question. She says, what's your thought on the situation where staff or managers have received coaching training and they go about doing their coaching, but they haven't been certified and they're not practicing according to the ICF new standards? Good question. I'm pondering about the impact to the reputation of coaching and those of us who try to maintain a professional coaching standard. Yeah, that's a really good question. We might actually take that one offline, I think, and have a deeper conversation. Um, I think I think for me, what we want in the workplace is people to be having coaching conversations. We want them to be using the coaching approach like we're talking about now. We want people to be using tools and techniques in coaching conversations. We want that to be built into the culture of the organization. Does everybody have to be a professional coach? Does everyone have to hold coaching qualifications? Well, of course they do. No, no, they don't all have to be professionals. They don't all have to be certified. I think the important thing is, though, is that we need to know what coaching means, what coaching is, and what coaching means in the organization. And that's where we can come back to the standards and say, when we talk about coaching and what it means in our organization, this is what it means. It means that we're evoking awareness. We're facilitating insight in our employees. We're facilitating insight and actions in our employees. And we're using tools and techniques. And here's the tools and techniques which we use in order to do that. So if you're going to walk around the organization calling yourself a coach, it doesn't bother me so much that you're not credentialed and qualified. What does bother me is if we're not clear about what that actually means, and if we don't have a standard that we're actually looking to achieve within the organization. So that's where, Jenny, if you're introducing, they've done coach training, so they've received the GROW model, or they've received some of the other tools and techniques, I'd want to see them actually using those tools and techniques, because that's what coaching means in our organization. So hopefully that gives you some insights there. Thank you. Jump in with your questions, because great, you're welcome. Jump in with your questions, because this is our opportunity. If you're thinking about things, we really do have an opportunity to go back directly to the International Coach Federation and ask our questions. So evokes awareness. I really like this. That is actually what we are doing. It's what we're being as coaches as well. We're being aware in our practice. We're using tools and techniques, which means it's quite a broad definition now. We can say there's different tools and techniques that we actually bring. Alrighty, let's jump forward again. Here's the last major change in terms of the structure. We've got in the past, we had core competencies number 9, 10, and 11, designing actions, planning and goal setting, and managing progress and accountability. These are now gathered under the heading of facilitates client growth. And I really like this because what we are doing as coaches is we are evoking awareness through our powerful questioning and different techniques we're using. And ultimately, we're doing this to facilitate client growth, to facilitate awareness, to facilitate learning, to facilitate growth and development of our clients. Can hopefully, jump in and tell me what you think. I think from our perspective, all the coaches on the line, from a workplace coaching point of view, this sounds very familiar to us. We are facilitating the client's growth and development. And the definition here is we're partnering with the client to transform learning and insight into action. I love that. I think that's exactly what we're doing. We're transforming their learning and the insights they get through the coaching into action. And we're promoting client autonomy in the coaching process. So we're promoting their autonomy, we're promoting their accountability, the client's responsibility in the coaching process, as you know, rather than telling, directing, etc., etc. Jenny says she can see they're approaching the competencies as more coaching outcome orientated. Yeah, so they've built into the competencies, I feel, more about what the process is that we're doing, the process of facilitating awareness, and then the outcome that leads to client growth. And we're partnering. So there's quite a lot of use of the word partnering within the core competencies as well. And I like that because it is what we're doing. We're sitting alongside, we're partnering rather than some sort of power relationship as well. Louisa says she likes the autonomy part. It empowers the coachees. Yes, that's right. Louisa, something interesting that came out of one of the discussions that I was involved in is that, and I'm not sure where I sit with this yet, you can jump in and let me know, but they're talking about potentially removing the terminology coachees out of things like the ethical standards, and they've removed it out of the core competencies. This is just a little by the by. The reason for that is because they're suggesting that with words like employees, if you say, my employee, that sets up a kind of a boss-subordinate relationship. And they're suggesting that employee and coachee and other terms, I can't remember them off the top of my head, that finish with E, employee, coachee, mentee, those kind of things. It kind of sets up a power relationship that I'm the boss and you're the subordinate. So they're trying to remove the terminology coachee, actually, because people associate it with employee, mentee, meaning a lesser, not equal partner. So that's going to be interesting to see how that actually evolves in how that evolves in our conversations, because in the workplace, when we're coaching, we refer to people as coachees, but I'm not trying to set up a power relationship at all. So it'll be something to actually watch how our language evolves there, I think. Yes, you're right. I actually asked what would the word be that you'd use, and they said client. Yeah. I'd suggest add and accountability after autonomy. Yes, promoting accountability is an important benefit. Yes, I agree with you. And it's actually written into the detail of the competencies as well. Yes, the word would be client. So they're saying, instead of saying facilitates coachees growth, they'd say facilitates client growth. Yeah, interesting, huh? Alrighty. Great, jump in, ask more questions. Let me know what you think. So that's an overview of the core competencies. As I mentioned, they're written as a global standard for coaching across countries. They're going to be translated into many different languages. The lens that we've taken to looking and reading the competencies is our lens, which is an organizational workplace coaching, executive coaching lens. So I'm thinking, well, what does it mean to us from that perspective? And for me, it actually, as I've mentioned a few times now, sounds better, reads a lot more effectively and succinctly, and I can relate to it a lot more. I find that I have to explain things less, which is a great thing too. Like if I'm having to explain what do I mean by intimacy, in the context of coaching, it gets kind of awkward. So I'd rather not have to explain that. Just talk about trust and safety. By the way, the other thing that's also there in the detail is around what where I say the other thing that's in the detail is where the boundary is. So where does coaching start and finish? And what's interesting is it's actually been written into ethics and standards now, the first competency, that we need to understand when it might be important to offer support services. And for those of you that have been tracking Open Doors development, we're now offering mental health first aid. And the reason we're doing that is because we think it's a really important boundary to understand when do we stop coaching and when might we offer other support services. So I was very interested to see that that had actually been written into the core competencies as well. It was kind of always there, implied, but now it's written in terms of being able to offer support services in the detail. So just to give you an idea of what's going on, coach training programs, accredited coach training programs like ourselves and coach training providers like ourselves, we have until January 2021 to implement the changes. So they're coming into effect from January 2021. We've got a bit more time because it's based on when our renewal actually happens. If people are going to apply for a new credential from the start of 2021, any coach recordings, any exams, the knowledge test that is done will reflect the new core competency. So that if you're going for your credential, a new credential at the start of 2021, then the core competencies will be built into that credential. That's why as coach training providers, we have to do the work now to make sure that we're actually implemented so that when people go for their credential in the new year, 2021, they're right to go. And the knowledge test, the coach knowledge test, it's called a CKA, that'll actually be updated as well. So that's if you're thinking of going for your credential and you don't have it at yet. Hey, but what about all those amazing coaches on the line that I can see that are credentialed already? Well, the ICF is saying no change at this point. So there's nothing we need to do, yay, in terms of having to reapply, redo a knowledge test, resubmit recordings or anything like that. So what our approach is, I think, as credentialed coaches is to continue to embody the ICF core competencies as we do, become familiar with them, think about in terms of reflective practice how we're actually implementing the new competencies. It should sound like what we're doing already, but there's nothing for us to actually physically do in terms of reapplying or anything like that. In terms of our timeline, our target, Open Door, we're actually targeting implementation of the new core competencies in February 2020. It's actually going to be a full year ahead of when we're actually required to do that. The reason for that is because we're actually going through existing reaccreditation processes right now. So we're going to build the new core competencies into the work we're doing now, which means that by February next year, we should be ready to go. Our course materials, our programs will be reflecting the new ICF core competencies. And I checked on that. And of course, the ICF are, well, not of course, but I checked on that. And the International Coach Federation are very happy. They're very happy that coach training providers implement the standards as soon as possible. They've given people a year, sometimes a bit longer, to actually do it. But when I asked about, well, when can we start to implement, they said straight away, which was really great. So we will roll with this in terms of implementation. There's a lot of detail, obviously, but you don't need to know about that. Oh, I just started thinking about the detail. I went, oh yeah, let's not talk about that. Alrighty, so that's the timeline. So I'm really encouraging people to have a read of them, have a think about, have a reflective practice about what the changes mean. Hopefully it will sound familiar to you. And then we're rolling. Let me just pause. I know we've got a few minutes over time, but let me just pause, see if there's any other questions that people might have around the changes. So as I mentioned, we're very supportive of these changes. I've mentioned a few times that I think they are in line or more reflective of practice, which is fantastic. I've mentioned that they have cut out language that's difficult or difficult to explain. I actually found a bit jarring. The core competencies are now reflective of what we are doing as coaches, but also of how we're being as coaches in terms of our mindsets. They are also reflective of our job as coaches. I think what makes an effective coach is that we are facilitating awareness within our clients that we're working with and using that awareness to promote their development and growth. Everything about that I really, really resonate with. And I'm saying I because I'm sharing my opinion. Hopefully when you read it, I'd be interested to hear what you say and you might feel the same way. So I really want you to contact us if you have any questions. We're in this really unique opportunity right now to really load up any questions that we might have. Great. Keep jumping with questions. Jenny says, got lots of comments coming through. Jenny says, I love how you updated and educated us so timely. Oh, that's thank you so much. Very professional and thoughtful of open door coaching. Yeah. Well, I had to update myself. I've been updating myself over the past couple of weeks. I wasn't allowed. We had to keep the changes confidential until last Friday. But as soon as we could communicate about the changes, I was, we're ready to communicate. So, and I'm pleased that we had this opportunity to do that. Thank you. The documents on the blog post, yes, you'll be able to download it from the blog. You can do that. If it's not on the blog right now, it'll be there like within the next 10 minutes or so. Yeah. I just couldn't find out how to click it into the box here for you to download. Good to see the ICF has reviewed and updated the competency standards. Good governance. Look forward to seeing the results of the survey. Yes, I think we all are actually. I think this is a massive, major piece of research that they've done. We'd be very keen to see what other insights they found. And I'm really interested in the background to the research as well. Great. Alrighty, so that brings us to the end of our webinar. A bit of an overview of the changes to the ICF Core Competencies. As I mentioned, we're very supportive of what's happened and the extensiveness of the research as well. If you do have other questions, I've mentioned that a few times. Please let me know so we can actually use our community to. We can use our community and leverage our community to actually ask the questions we need. Jody says, thanks, Natalie. A good overview of the changes. They make sense to me. Happy Friday. Yes, well, on that note, thanks, Jody. I'll say happy Friday to you all. Please keep in touch, and I look forward to catching up with you at our next webinar. I'll say goodbye for now.